How's it going, everybody? Welcome on into the Check Your Brain podcast here on Patreon. If you're listening on Patreon, it's going out on Monday, August 22nd. If you're listening for free, wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, iHeartRadio, everything, you'll have your opportunity to listen to that for free on Wednesday. But if you're listening for free, go to patreon.com/Tony Mazur and check out the podcast. I usually post about 4 podcasts a week of my rants and ravings. And then sometimes I have a guest on, and sometimes I have some pretty good guests on. And this is one of them today. This is Michale Graves. And a lot of you know Michale Graves, and he was at one time the lead singer of the Misfits. And for the last 20 plus years, he's been on his own, whether it's in bands or his solo tour, has put out so many great songs and is a true artist. And and we'll get to a lot of the other stuff that I guess has caused some kind of backlash or controversy over the years. But I've really loved your whole body of work, and just and listening to some of your stories and going to see you last year on your storytelling tour and hearing the background of a lot of your music, of who some of these figures are, and putting it into a band like the Misfits, for example, somebody who a group that's an iconic group that you're replacing, so to speak, somebody who's but you also brought some fresh perspective into a band that was, I guess, is so influential at one time. And you have a lot of people that will talk about the eras of the Misfits, and there's a lot of people who say that, yeah, no, I prefer the second era of the Misfits because of Michale Graves and what he was able to do. So thank you so much for doing this and being on the podcast. And it honestly, it was great to go see that live show that you did last year. And I'm looking forward to whenever you come around my neck of the woods again.
Well, thank you very much. What a gracious and honoring intro that was. I appreciate it very much. I'm looking forward to our conversation. So, inquire away.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny because when you think of a band like the Misfits that was they became a household name because of a lot of imagery, and where you would see somebody wearing a Misfits shirt was the same way you would see someone wearing a Ramones t-shirt. And I'm thinking, name me 2 songs, name me 2 Misfits songs, name me 2 Ramones. And
Right.
by the way, I'm starting to see that with Gen Z now. They're wearing like David Bowie shirts.
Yeah.
Name me one David Bowie song. But you
Yeah.
would see that, and I guess James Hetfield from Metallica helped put the Misfits on the map by wearing their shirts back in the early '80s when they were really kind of making it big. And you're somebody that a lot of that music from American Psycho, you're really really young, and how iconic it became. But that really was your first big, quote unquote, big boy band. How did you, for a lot of people who don't know, how did you get picked to be in the Misfits?
Well, I was at the right place at the right time, so to speak. I got picked because I auditioned and I impressed Jerry and the other folks that were looking at me. But there was always uncertainty about picking somebody, because choosing your singer is a big deal. And Doyle especially was very, very rock headed about making the commitment. There was always talk about Glenn maybe coming back. Dave Vanian's name was thrown around all the time, that Dave Vanian was interested and he was going to come out. At one point, the Misfits took out an ad in the newspaper here on the East Coast, um, and when that got out and word got out that Jerry was recording all of the auditions, like, come down and play with the Misfits and audition, and we'll give you a tape. Everybody was walking out of there with a tape. All you had to do was bring your own cassette tape. So there was like hundreds of people showed up from all over the place. And so I just kept at it, man. I kept at it. And the story goes that now I auditioned in March of 1994. So by the time October rolled around, Halloween, the Misfits had to make a decision about their singer if they were going to launch. If not, they were going to have to wait another year in order for that, because the Misfits have to come out on Halloween. That just, they can't come out on Thanksgiving. That's just stupid.
Yeah, it's like you're like Trans-Siberian Orchestra around Christmas.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So Halloween's coming up, and Ken Creedy, who was the manager of Typo Negative at the time, called these guys up and said, if you guys are going to launch, or you guys should launch on Halloween, and Typo Negative is inviting you to come out during the encore part of their sold out show in Roseland Ballroom in New York City on Halloween night. And so Jerry was like, yes, let's do this. The only problem is we don't have any singer. We don't have a singer. And so they asked if Pete would do it, if Pete Steele would do it. They asked Pete. Pete said, I'd love to do it. I'll sing with you guys, but I don't know any of the songs. So they asked me to come and teach Pete Steele the songs that they were going to do. I think it was like maybe 5 songs: Halloween, Horror Business, Martian, Skulls, and then I think like Die, My Darling, something like that. So we all go to Brooklyn, and I start and we start playing, and I start teaching Pete these songs, and he stops everybody in the middle of this rehearsal, and he says that, pointing to me, he says, this is your singer. You got to give the gig to this kid. He's great. He sings these songs better than anybody.
And
in
you're
this
like
room.
19, 20 years old here.
At this point, I was 20. I was 20 years old, freaking out because I was a huge Typo Negative fan. I wasn't much of a Misfits fan. I knew the music because I heard a lot of punk music. So I was like, oh, all right, I know that song. But Typo Negative, I was a huge Typo Negative fan. So yeah, so it was just crazy. It was just all really, really crazy the way that it came together, and that's really how I got in the Misfits.
It's so incredible because I've heard you talk about. Now I'd like to hear your background of some, because it's interesting hearing Saturday Night and Dig Up Her Bones and Descending Angel, and you're writing these. I think you were in high school. You wrote some of these, or like right after, and all of a sudden you're joining, because and there had to have been immense pressure where you at least had Sammy Hagar when he's joining Van Halen, that, look, I can hold my own. I'm Sammy Hagar.
Yeah.
I already did I Can't Drive 55. I'm just joining a new band. You're a kid, and there's a lot. You go to a Misfit show, and these are people that are purists, and they want, if you're going to do their music, you need to do it the way the fans really want. And
Yeah.
you come in there, and this is just my perspective, but you brought a fresh perspective to a band that was already iconic. And that's where I think a lot of people look back in that era, and you look up Dig Up Her Bones, the official video on YouTube. It has, 10, I think it has like 50 plus million views, because a lot of people, that was their introduction to the Misfits. There were times you couldn't find, you go to a record store and you try to find cassette tapes of old Misfits shows and or studio albums. There wasn't a large body of work by then. So then by the time you join, after all the settlements between Jerry and Glenn and everything, that you have this, so now you have to deliver. And again, you're 20, 21, 22 years old, and you really don't want to disappoint. You are a kid in those, essentially.
Yeah, it was crazy. I was a kid. I didn't realize how immature I was, because you're not that that's a necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying, as a 20-year-old, as opposed to a 31, 32-year-old or a 40-year-old man who has children. I had just gotten out of high school. I was still trying to figure out all the stuff that a 20-year-old figures out, where most people are going off to college and doing that sort of thing with their life. I had just joined the Misfits, and all of what you just said is true about the fans and the legacy of the band. And now here I am in the middle of it all. with no one looking out for me, with me just making these decisions about things and just going on the whims of what other people are saying in this huge world, all of a sudden I'm looking to my left and Marilyn Manson is right there. And then I look to my right, Dave Mustaine is sitting there and he's playing with, and there's just all this crazy world. And Metallica's coming backstage and they're asking me if it's cool if we play Die Die My Darling with you. Hey, man, can we sing Last Caress with you? I'm like, you're Metallica. You can do anything you want right now. You're James Hetfield. Um, so yeah, man, it was crazy. It was crazy, and it was very, very overwhelming, and which is why it ended the way that it did. I should have, I never should have gone home that night. Never should have walked away from that band in Orlando. I should never have done it, but I didn't know what else to do. Um, you know, things were just, it was just crazy, and I didn't know who to call. I didn't have anybody in my life um that could help me steer the ship and keep my head on straight. And it had done a great deal of mental damage to me. Not only the things that I was dealing with in the band, but the things that I was dealing with in my own personal life. At this point, I was just, what I really felt like was just a resource that was being mined, because I was this young man. I was tapped into the zeitgeist. I was writing these profound songs. I had this body of work even beforehand as a young man that was, I was essential, and I was making people a lot of money, but nobody cared about me. I mean, they cared about me staying and doing the things that I needed to do in order to make the ship roll forward. So yeah, it was a crazy time. I was definitely I was prepared as a musician, as an artist. I was great, but there was a lot that really rolled over me.
Because I noticed that doing research for the interview and seeing old interviews from the 1996, 97, all the way to 99 when Famous Monsters came out, where
Yeah.
even though you're the lead singer of the band, it almost seemed like you weren't the face. It's just my vision of it. You weren't the face. It was Jerry. It was Doyle. You were just kind of, hey, I'm here for the ride. Kind of how you look at how Alice in Chains is now, where William Duvall is doing a lot of the Lane Staley parts. But let's be
Yeah.
honest, it's Jerry Cantrell and the band. And it seemed to me that you were just kind of there and doing your justice for the old Misfit songs, and then you're writing the new stuff. But it seemed like, because Jerry has, had the hair, and Doyle is, built like a Greek god, that they were kind of the mainstays of the band, and you were just like that. So when you look back, do you feel any, I don't want to say regret, but do
Mm.
you feel that you didn't appreciate it enough as much as you could, that you can look back and say, look, I should just sit back, and as you mentioned, you're there with Metallica, you're there with Megadeth, and to sit back and go, boy, this is the life right now. Like, do you look at your younger self in your early 20s and say, man,
Yes.
if I just sat there and
Yes.
just took it all in? Instead, I'm like, yeah, well, I got a gig and I have, this is what I do. Because again, you're in your early 20s, and we all do things that either we regret or we wish could be a little bit done better in those days.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's a certain truth. I don't disagree with that. I think that there's a certain amount of truth in that. I was certainly blown away by all of it, and I did really take in the enormity of it, because I never had a big ego to be like, oh well, of course I'm hanging out with you, Mr. Manson. Of course I'm hanging out with. So I was just always like, oh my God. I think where I went off the rails is that I was, because the nature of an artist is an emotional one. I am a very emotional person by nature, so a lot of my emotions would steer me towards decision in my decision making process. So as a young man, which a lot of young people do, you base your decisions on emotions instead of being objective about it, waiting for those emotions to calm down and saying, all right, let me take an actual look at this situation or this problem that I'm dealing with and make the right decisions about it. My thing was like, I'm just not getting on the plane. Fuck you. I'm going to hang up. You're not going to be able to get me on the phone. I'm not getting on the plane. See ya. Like, that's not a mature way to deal with stuff. And so here I was like that. And there was no one that in my life that was able to pull me aside and go, calm down, dude. Let's talk about this. What's going on? Let's look long term. Jerry, come sit down and talk to him instead of, so it was like that. It's hard for me. I'll be honest with you, bro. It's hard for me to look back at that run with the Misfits and not be critical of a lot of the things that I did. I understand now a lot more so the responsibility that I had and the shortcomings that and the things that I didn't live up to. But it's easy to do that, and that's a life lesson really for anybody. My dad always my dad gave me this phrase when I was very, very young, and I'll give to you and your audience. And it was, if the queen had balls, she'd be the king, right?
I love
So
that.
it's not like I knew at the time that these things that were the decisions I was making were going to affect my life the way that they did. So and in working with young people, I often as well impart on them, and it's something that I work at in my life as well. You can't get mired down in the past. You can look at in the rear view mirror all day long. I could do that all day long and be critical and just say, if I had just stayed that night, I'd be rich. I'd be on a tour bus and there'd be all these things and my life would be different. Yeah, but maybe not, because if the queen had balls, then she'd be the king.
And that's what's interesting you say that, because me talking to you right now, I for 15 plus years I worked in radio. I was a radio
Yeah,
guy, and especially during all the COVID stuff, I had to start a podcast. I had to do something, and talking politics and also doing stand-up comedy and interviewing people. It was a lot of fun to do for a bit. And I ended up getting let go from my radio station because I had a podcast that was controversial. And
yeah,
I look back on that and say, if I only went back and said, maybe I could have edited a little bit or just completely deleted it, said that wasn't a good podcast, I'd still be working right now. Instead,
right.
I have a day job and I'm doing podcasting when I can, like you're on a Sunday. And if I only did this, if I only did that, but our decisions that we make or some that we don't make lead to different, what we do now. And then you'll always kind of have those memories. And
Right.
it's an interesting life. And especially for you that, you've been doing solo stuff, you've been in your own bands for the last 22 years now. And are you so when I got to see you last year at doing the acoustic show and the storytelling, what do you prefer? Or is it like a certain time in your life? Do you prefer being a solo act, or do you like being with a band and playing with that full set and putting the makeup on and everything?
I enjoy it all. I really do. It's different. The different presentation, the different performances, use a totally different use different parts of the skill set that I have as an artist. I really, really enjoy the acoustic performances when it's just keyed down and I'm able to communicate more with my audience. When we step back, and you were saying that when you were doing research for our conversation, that that in the interviews it was almost like I was third wheel and I just kind of sat back and it was just a Jerry Doyle thing. When we first started and there was no new music, that was fine with me. I was fine with taking the third wheel. But once American Psycho came out, and as we were doing that and getting more and more interviews and people asking questions about the music and things like that, I never had the opportunity to answer and talk about the band and the music through my eyes. I was writing this music. Dig Up Her Bones, as you indicated, and which is true. I wrote Dig Up Her Bones when I was in high school. I was 16 years old. I didn't even have a license yet. I wrote that song. And it was one of the singles off the album. So was American Psycho. I pushed those guys to call the album American Psycho. I crafted that music and pushed the band in a direction for a reason. Those lyrics mean something and meant something to me and to the young people. And so I felt like I had something to say. I did step back and in the beginning of the band, but then it was just, I was like Forrest Gump, I was just kind of like in the back, like, hey, someone just asked a question about Dig Up Her Bones, and Jerry just runs the gambit with the answer. And so I was feeling very, very overlooked as an artist, and so I've always had that in me to where I want to communicate about my music and communicate about the things that are on my mind and my worldview through the things that I'm doing. But I love being theatrical and putting the makeup on with a whole band and rocking out and raising it to that level and of performance and athleticism. And so yeah, I'm a creative, so I love being in that space and I love being in that headspace.
Yeah, that's I haven't gotten a chance to see you with the full band. I'm only 34, so I wasn't going to concerts in the 90s, but it was one of those cases where I've seen the Misfits a couple of times. In fact, I've interviewed Jerry and when Des Cadino was with the group. And then I got to see them at an award show where they brought Andy Bierzak from Black Veil Brides to sing. And I'm like, well, he's no Michael Graves, I'll tell you that much, and messed up
Right.
the lyrics a few times. But it's what I guess looking back, do you still have a relationship at all with the guys? Is it cordial at all, or is it like, hey, that was once our lead singer and now he's not anymore? So hey, if we see each other in passing, we're fine. Or how's that going?
I think it's more of that. I have Jerry and Doyle's phone number in my phone, and um, Doyle and I at times trade pleasantries. Hey, how you doing? Or maybe we saw someone that we mutually know. Um, he raised his daughter, and his daughter and my niece went to the same high school. So my brother and Doyle would see each other, and so it was just kind of like that, sort of a hey, Merry Christmas type of relationship. I don't talk to Jerry much at all, really. I send him texts now and then, just like hey, thinking of you type stuff. But that's about it. That's about it.
Yeah,
I
it's
wish
not.
they would call. I wish they would call me up so that we could play American Psycho and Famous Monsters. Maybe work on some more music. But I know that Jerry just released some solo stuff.
What about Glenn Danzig? Like, have you had any kind of relationship? Did he coach you, or was there animosity because you were taking his place in the band that he helped create?
In the beginning, he didn't want to. When I was in the band in the mid '90s, he didn't want anything to do with the Misfits. He didn't want to talk about them. It was bitter in his mouth. So there was no conversation, and so I was the very, very last thing on his mind. And
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 by the
even
way, Danzig was massive in those days too. So it's not like he
yeah,
was just sitting at home and seeing you guys on TV. It's like Mother '93 came out around that time, and a
huge.
lot of huge songs. So he had his own thing going on.
Right. And I knew that because I'm 47. So when Mother hit on MTV, like I knew Danzig. I knew Glenn Danzig. I didn't really know the Misfits. So when I put the two together, I was just like, I'm not worthy, dude. That's Glenn Danzig. Um, but so there's no I've never met him. I've never spoken to him. I've tried a couple of times actually to through his people to get through his wall to be able to reach him and just have a conversation with him and see where it went, if not nothing at all, to just say thank you for a lot of my career and the opportunity to be a part of something that he built. It's his brainchild. The Misfits came out of Glenn Danzig, and when I got in that band, I always said to myself, just when it comes to the music and when it comes to the Misfits, when I just whatever you do as far as creativity, creatively, would Glenn be proud of it? Would I be able to articulate it to Glenn and he go, okay? That was always on my mind. But man, like I said, not for nothing, I can make these people a lot of friggin' money if somebody would just call me.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I love that.
And I know Glenn likes money. Everybody likes money.
So you were in the Misfits basically 5 years, and we've spent all this time talking about it, but you've done other work in the last 22 years. And do you ever, you're with this interview talking about that few years there, and do you ever sit back and go, I've done things since then? And I remembered, I went to see the band Eve 6 one time, and they're, I think, in their early 40s. And they wrote Inside Out, the Heart in a Blender song, when they were in their teens.
Yeah.
And they cannot do a show without playing that song. Otherwise, there will be a riot.
Right.
And what's interesting is when you have musicians that will write something when they're a teenager, and or like say the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones are in their early 20s writing music, and almost 60 years later, they still have to play those songs.
Yeah.
Do you still get a joy when you play some of, whether it is Dig Up Her Bones or Saturday Night or some of those early songs that you wrote, and even some of your early solo stuff too? And do you also, have they taken on different meanings as time has gone on, different meanings, different interpretations based on what you were going through in your life at that time?
A little bit. Some of them maybe a little bit, but when I play, I close my eyes because it's a very, very visual experience for me. Even when my eyes are open, I don't know how to describe it. Only it's like emotions that I can see. It's like a dream. It's a very dreamy state for me when I play. So if I'm playing Dig Up Her Bones or Die Monster Die or Crying on Saturday Night, I am just like anybody else that hears those songs, where those songs are embedded in them. I'm catapulted back to, well, I don't know if I'd be catapulted because you're going forward. I'm sucked back to the time that when I wrote that song, like I could see where I'm sitting. It's clear as day. I can feel the things that I was feeling. It doesn't necessarily make sense, but I can still sense and feel that same emotion, that same thing that was happening, which then catapults me forward. And then in doing that and playing that, then I'll see different things in my mind, maybe things that are in the present or recently past that become revelations to me in the space of that music. So again, like I said, I'm very metaphysical in my music and the interpretation of it. And I think that's one of the reasons that songs don't get stale for people that their process is like mine, their artistic process is like mine, that's how it stays fresh. And that's how the songs don't suck either when you play them. When you have to play Dig Up Her Bones on tour 120 times, in the span of 3.5 months. It's like,
Yeah. Because like with stand-up comedy, I know that where some comedians, is, I've been doing comedy for almost 9 years now, that you almost get to a point where it's karaoke, and where it is, what the joke, where your punchline, what's gonna hit, as long as you have the timing. And there are some comics that are so emotional, and then they keep tinkering with their material, and others are almost robotic to the point where they're doing their joke and people are laughing, but in their mind they're like, let's see, the restaurant I want to go to that here, it's closed at 10:30, and I think they stop serving food at 10. So if I get off stage in the next 22 minutes, that I'd be able to make it and get the less. So they're thinking of other things while they're doing something else. But then there's others where I was talking to Scooter Ward from Cold a couple of months ago, and he still also gets emotional. He starts crying when he talks about some of his songs that, and I'm thinking to myself, you've played this 5,000 times. You've done this song, and you're in a small venue in Ohio, and you're on stage weeping over something
Yeah.
that you wrote 20 plus years ago. But that's great art. That's that emotional attachment, and it does not go unnoticed by the audience.
Yeah, and there's artistic purity there as well. That's like, I hate to indicate, like, a tragedy or a great loss. When you have a tragedy or a great loss, for example, in maybe earlier in your life, it's something that you look back on, and that feeling is always there. It never changes. It never changes. Or same with a happy moment. Let's bring it to that, like a gleeful, joyful, like the birth of a child or something wonderful. You think back on it, and the first time you fell in love, you feel that inside, and it never really changes. There's a purity to that. That's a wonderful thing. That's love. That's such a human thing. Um, it supersedes words. It's an amazing thing, and that's what I love about the arts. It's what I love about music, is that there's magic in it, that in that way, that just vibrating air and making these sounds the way that we do, we're able to get into parts of our brain that are impenetrable by other things and affect us on a level like that.
I love that. And that kind of leads me into getting, as you've gotten older and you cause a little controversy in the was it conservative punk and talking just a little bit, yeah. But you think about how times have changed since then, where you were on Jon Stewart's show and you were at least able to get a lot of those points across, to the point where now in 2022, if you're a musician, come out and say, I love Donald Trump, or I'm a conservative, I'm a libertarian, I'm this and that, you're done for. You're going to get people who are calling venues and saying, "Do you know you have a Nazi who is performing at your venue? How dare you?" And then they have to. All these club owners are going to be very fickle and say, "We can't have the controversy. We got to." So then you have to create your own venue. I saw you were doing living room shows and everything. That it's terrible what's going on right now, and it's really gotten so much worse. And you've been in the music scene for over a quarter century, and it's incredible when you see how people just go lockstep with the regime's narrative. And if you stray from it, especially if you are an entertainer, if you're an actor, you're a musician, you're a sports figure, you start, just because you're expressing some point of view that's really largely not controversial, and here you start ruffling feathers because you're like, yeah, by the way, I am not one of those people who is a diehard communist who's who's working in the music industry, that
Yeah,
you think for yourself and you have half a brain. And I was messaging you the other day talking about this because I was listening to your episode of Radio Deadly on Censored.tv, and you were talking about the Rock Against Reagan in the 80s, and I remember Rock Against Bush in the early 2000s.
that's
And
right.
it's one thing if you're anti-war. It's one thing if you're like, look, we shouldn't be in Afghanistan, we shouldn't be in Iraq. I'm talking about 2003 when I was going to Warp Tours and going to a lot of these shows. But as you said, that, and it really kind of rang a bell for me, was it wasn't just anti-war, it was anti-American. And there was a
Yeah,
lot of very anti-American sentiment that was happening in the early 2000s, and that's bled over into what
yeah,
we're seeing today.
100%, 100%. Um, a ton of money was pouring into progressive and liberal causes, Music for America, MoveOn.org, Punk Voter, lots and lots of money. Fine. But like you said, it wasn't about, we weren't having these conversations about, should we be at war, should we not? I mean, in a micro sense we were, but the overarching sentiment that was being sown within those movements and the literature that you were handed was that America is bad, white people are bad, and America, white people came here and built America upon raping and pillaging and burning and looting and slavery, and the military's bad, and everything is just bad, and you have no future, and the economy. And it was enraging young people. And the punk side of things, it was just like, yeah, let's, come to these concerts, and we're gonna a good old night of rage. And people didn't even know what they were raging about. They were just angry at something. And so, and and then within the echo chamber of things, it would just became that culture. And that was fine when there wasn't literally millions of dollars by people like Andy Rappaport, etc., George Soros. Google those names. Again, Music for America, MoveOn.org, punkvoter.com, hand over fist, and other organizations that were seeking to register young people to vote and educate them, quote unquote,
Yes.
educate them.
I saw that in the early 90s. You probably remember the that Rock the Vote 1992. It was it
Yeah,
was and
I
Nickelodeon was
remember all that, but it was much more nonpartisan. It
yeah.
wasn't. It didn't feel like it wasn't. If you're not going to be part of this, then you can't be part of anything. Then you get thrown out the gate of the village, and you're not allowed back in, so that you starve and die of thirst. And so slowly, and that's why I was screaming so loudly when the whole conservative punk thing got attacked, and I was being attacked because it was no longer necessarily about policy. Like I wasn't doing media and interested in talking about specific policies. That wasn't my main concern. My main concern was that people were excluding me from things and blacklisting me from things, and I was being kicked off of social platforms even then on MySpace, simply for being a detracting voice. And I said, I was saying, if we keep pumping this rhetoric into young people, and you keep doing this to people like me, we're going to get to a place where nobody wants to be, and people are going to get killed, people are going to get hurt, people are going to be jailed. Free Joe Biggs.
Yeah.
And we're at that place now. We're at that place.
Well, it's dissenting opinions where and I remember this a couple of years ago. It was 4 years ago. It's 2018 is when they threw off Alex Jones on Twitter and
Right.
Instagram and Facebook and everything
And
else.
I got caught up in that.
Yeah, and then Laura Loomer, Gavin McInnes, and a lot of people on what they now call the dissident right are people who weren't really controversial. I mean, yeah, you can make a crude joke every so often, but they were influential. Like at the time, they're throwing off Alex Jones off of Twitter, but David Duke and Louis Farrakhan and Richard Spencer, who they were still on and they were verified too, I believe. Yet, why is Alex Jones and why is Michael Graves and why are some of these other people who are, Lauren Southern and Faith Goldie and everybody else who's on that side starts getting demonized? It's because it's playing into this narrative of going up against that regime. It's one of the things I talk about on my podcast all the time is when you have a voice that's going up against the regime, which is what Trump was. Why do you think they love? I mean, 20 years ago, it's, we hate George Bush. He's Hitler. He's a monkey. Now they love George Bush and they love Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney and everybody. What changed? Well, it's because it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. It's about pushing forth that narrative. If you're not pushing forth the narrative and you're going up against the regime, then you're answering to a lot of questions right now. And that's what's been happening. And that culminated in what I call what the leftist crystal knocked, which was January 6th, where that's the worst thing ever. And I'm like, look, if people want to listen to this and they have anything about it, January 6th was not what everybody wants to think it is. And that's why this committee and that's why everything else is really kind of blown up in their faces. And you happen to be around there on January 6th and playing a show. And again, you got caught up on controversy over a year and a half ago. What happened with that? And I don't know if you're going through any legal situation or if there's anything that you can't talk about, but you ended up getting caught up in that because you were playing in DC that day. What happened from that? And is anything else going to come out for you in that whole situation?
So I was there January 5th, January 6th. I was not only there as a spectator to be part of what was going on, but I was also there to perform on the Latinos for Trump stage, which I did. I also sang the national anthem the morning of January 6th. But I got there on January 5th because Roger Stone was speaking, Alex Jones was speaking, Owen Schroyer was speaking. There was a whole litany of people that I wanted to hear speak. I knew that Joe Biggs was going to be there, and Rufio was going to be there, Enrique Tarrio, and a bunch of Proud Boys that I had known. So I wanted to make the rounds and stop in. I have, I know the folks over at Infowars, and obviously I am involved with the Proud Boys. And I wanted to walk around and take pictures and talk to people and just be part of what was happening. So that was January 5th. I hooked up with some of the Proud Boys and I was going to play a show. I was actually going to play a show on January 5th. We changed it to doing it on January 6th. I was just going to do an acoustic show for everybody because of what happened in December before January 6th. A bunch of guys went out there and people got hurt, people got stabbed. It was very, very violent. One of my roles, not only within Proud Boys and other organizations that I pop into and play for and speak to, is to bring an anchor to these folks and to in talking about the Proud Boys in DC, January 5th, January 6th, I wanted to de-escalate a situation. I wanted to meet everybody, keep them in one spot, gather everybody, and so that nobody was going out on the street and just, interact. And so January 6th, the morning of January 6th, I was on stage, Latinos for Trump, doing our thing. It was insane. The president started to speak, and so where we were located over by across the street from the Capitol, near one of the Senate building. So the president was speaking blocks away. It was rainy, it was cold. I was there with my manager, my buddy Arturo, and we had been walking around and so the president was late speaking, and I don't know, maybe a half hour before he stopped speaking, I think. I got our turn. I said, listen, let's head over to where Alex Jones is going to rendezvous with everybody and rally. Let's head in that direction to get ahead of the crowd.
Which was on the other side of the building, right?
Yeah, we had to cross the street. It wasn't too far for us. So Arturo and I leave, and we're walking up the sidewalk, and I see all these police officers, and I can hear the chatter on their radio. I see vehicles with lights on that are flashing. I'm a I'm a situational awareness type of my senses are heightened. I just felt like something was wrong, man. Like my spidey senses were tingling. I remember somebody came by and asked me, "What the hell is going on?" And I said to him, "I don't know, man. I think I said to him, I think that Mike Pence must be in that line of cars." But I knew that wasn't true in my head because what was happening inside the Capitol. So it just seemed strange. So before we crossed the street to the Capitol, and meanwhile, right over on the other side, all hell had begun to break loose. I turned to Artur and I said, "Listen, let's just go back to the hotel and reorganize. Let's get dry. We'll recharge the batteries on our camera, and we'll see we'll see what happens in a couple of hours, and we'll head over to where I was going to play that night. But I started getting phone calls as we were pulling out of DC, like where are you? What are you doing? And I began to see the footage actually that was coming out of the InfoWars broadcast, and saw that all hell was breaking loose. So I got out of DC. I had discernment to not cross that street. If I had crossed the street and kept on going, I would absolutely be in jail right now. Absolutely. Because of my affiliation with Proud Boys, with InfoWars, with everything. I definitely would have been one of the people caught up in it. But I wasn't, thank God. God had helped me, or some sort of divine, because I didn't cross that. I knew something was wrong, man, and I turned around. But I am going to appear as a witness for the defense in the trial against Joe Biggs, Enrique Tarrio, Rufy, Ethan Nordean,
Yeah.
and Ryan Katz. So yeah, that's as far as my legal, troubles, if you will, go. I'm gonna do what the right thing, and I'm gonna go and appear for those guys, because they should not be where they are right now, and the treatment that they have had to endure is just beyond any measure. Joe Biggs is a double Purple Heart recipient. He's a man of valor and strength and honor and courage. He's a good guy. He's got a young kid at home that he loves. He loves his daughter and his wife, and then and he's sitting in a jail cell.
They said he pissed, he urinated in the Capitol. It's like, yeah, in a urinal. That's what he did. Yes, he used the bathroom inside the Capitol. Okay.
And then January 6th, those committee hearings on the first night that was televised nationally, those people lied about that man. Liz Cheney and that officer lady, I forget what her name is, straight up lied about Joe Biggs leading all of these people into the Capitol building in that way. It's just awful.
And I love when they bring up Ray Epps, and they said, "Oh, we can't comment on an investigation right now. You comment on everything else, but you mentioned Ray Epps and other Fed agents who are, or saying that we need to storm the Capitol." It's so ridiculous, because when you think of the Proud Boys, I remembered watching the genesis of the Proud Boys, which was at the Anthony Cumia studio. I wasn't there for it, but I watched on video at Compound on West 35th and 7th in New York, and Gavin's doing a show, and he has a producer who was 24 and was a virgin and would go to Aladdin musicals and not get laid after that. And he's like, our mission is to get you laid. And they started playing a song that was from the Aladdin musical. It got cut from the movie, called Proud of Your Boy. So they made this ridiculous group where it was like the Water Buffaloes from the Flintstones, or from the Honeymooners and everything. It was a drinking club. It was like the Knights of Columbus. Everybody got together and you start punching each other unless you name 5 breakfast cereals. That's all it was. And then it turned into, Gavin would do these speeches with Ann Coulter and and Milo and others in 2016, 2017, and realized that the security around it was less than stellar. So the Proud Boys were saying, "Hey guys, hey Gavin, we'll help. Let's just go. We'll protect you. If we need to get into a fight, if any of these Antifa morons come around, and then we'll go out and have a couple of drinks." That's how it started, and then it became where the poor boys, Joe Biden's talking about it, and Trump has to mention it. And I'm like, again, this was the drinking club that started at the Anthony Cumia studio 5 years ago, and now all of a sudden it's being mentioned in presidential debates.
It was the only group of people, or the leading group organization, along with like Patriot Prayer and other groups like that were willing to push back against Antifa and BLM, and yeah, it's it's awful because it's so transparent, and that's the thing. Like you said, the jig is up. I mean, everybody knows that the whole January 6th thing is not the narrative that is coming out of our institutions of government, the power structure, if you will. Everybody, and I say everybody, but a lot of people, many people, and each day that goes by, more and more people are waking up to what's going on. They know that something is not right, and something is not right, obviously, and it's this, to if you're if you don't know anything about World War II and Hitler, his main goal was the Ubermenschen, this like, super race of human beings, a super race of human beings that uber rich, powerful people are trying to um, bring about. They're trying to be the master race on this planet. And me and you and all your audience and most of the people on planet Earth are not in that plan. And it's being ramped up. It's just being ramped up.
Yeah, they're
You know,
making
it's
they're talking about making us eat bugs and showering once a month. And you're saying, well, what does this have
right.
anything to do with? Here's my ultimate thoughts on January 6th is that as Gavin calls it, the meandering, that I would admit it would be a horrible look if for
Mm,
an entire year that the media not only allowed rioting because of in the what we call the summer of George after George Floyd and all of this other stuff in these major cities burning down and CNN on TV saying there's fiery but mostly peaceful protests, and every major city had massive violent protests which turned into riots, which turned into just absolute chaos. And you have the media allowing it. And not only that, you had the government and people in the CDC and the WHO and everything saying, well, COVID is a dangerous virus, but racism is even more. Racism is a public health crisis right now. And they allowed this to go on. Yet at the same time, then you have people upset about an election that had serious problems that led up to it. And then the problems that on election night, 2000 Mules, everything. Um, and in that time between early November and early January of a lot of the fraud and a lot of these cases that started popping up and people were upset. So it was in 2020. Yeah, it's okay to protest. And you know what? If somebody throws a brick through a window, that's just some people have different ways of protesting and making their voice
right.
heard. Then
Right.
we turn the calendar to 2021 and a grandma with cancer who walks between the ropes in the Capitol building uh, is going to prison. And we're
Right.
like, yo, no, you know what? Not everybody has the right to protest and make their voice heard. And ultimately, what it comes down to is the Capitol is the church for leftists. It's not like leftists who are atheists don't believe in, they just don't believe in God or organized religion, but they believe their organized religion is the state. And
Yes.
when
Right.
you see people attacking the state, the Capitol, that's the way a Christian would when they see a church being attacked. And it was again January 6th. Yeah, there were a lot of problems that happened, and I think a lot of it was ushered by the feds. But
Yeah.
if it's amazing.
Nobody, or not nobody, but nobody in the January 6th commission, for example, is asking, well, why weren't there enough people to protect the Capitol? You have something very important happening inside. You knew that there was going to be tens, hundreds of thousands of people showing up. There was 5 at that breach site, that first breach site with Ray Epps and all these people. There were 5 police officers against, there was tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people behind them. Like, so you're going to put 5 cops there, and then there's going to be 5 cops another 500 yards away with some like stupid little league plastic fence. Like, who made that decision? Why aren't we talking about that? We're talking about Joe Biggs leading people into the Capitol and doing. It's nuts. It's the same. All of this, all of this is back to punk voter and why punk voter was bad. And it's the same thing with anything else. That's what justice has, those scales, right? So you got punk voter, like, and no other way to counter that information, or those facts that are giving to people to educate them. And all the same thing with January 6th. There's no cross-examination, none of those things that we've literally built our society and our republic on.
It's the
Those things
approved
have
talking
broken.
points. That's what bothers
Right.
me is that it's, and I talked about this on my podcast yesterday about with Brian Stelter from CNN, that he
Yeah.
got shown the door, his reliable sources. And the whole thing is, I look back to Jon Stewart, and right around the time you were on the show back in 03, 04, he goes on Crossfire, and he starts chiding Paul Begala and Tucker Carlson by saying this show is what's wrong with America, and this shows what's wrong with the media and body and politics. And people cheered him on by saying, yeah, we don't need two sides bickering about things, and then maybe at the end of the show we agree to disagree and shake hands. With Jon Stewart, who's, I think, one of the worst people in America, because what he was talking about was, no, we can't have a Republican and a Democrat come together and find some kind of common ground. We need one approved talking point, and then everybody else is castigated outside that Overton window. And that's what we've had during COVID was we can't have Jay Bhattacharya. We can't have anybody who's mentioning anything related to the efficacy of masks and the ridiculousness of what social distancing was, or that these vaccines have not been time tested and are not working. And if you get these vaccines, you're not going to get COVID. Well, then everybody got COVID. And yet there's no repercussions for Fauci or Birx or Walensky or anything, because there's one approved talking point. And for people who don't look at the real numbers, and they don't really dig, and they don't really think for themselves, those NPCs, they just go along with what is being told. And that's what the one big problem is the flow of information only comes from one source, and it's a sewage pipe.
Yes, and it's manipulated in a it's manipulated, and it's controlled by huge organizations and behavioral scientists, and people's naivete and ignorance and good nature are certainly taken advantage of. One needs to look no further than, once again, Nazi Germany, and the levers of actions that were taken, and the chain of events that led to the Holocaust, and the destruction, and
Weimar Republic, yeah.
the killing of, right, millions and millions and millions of people on an industrial scale for no rhyme or reason. People often say, well, how could those guards at Auschwitz be doing the things that they are doing? Well, how can the guards in DC's Gitmo there in Washington DC be doing the things that they're doing?
Following orders.
Right, just following orders. I don't know if it was Plato or Socrates said that those who control the stories control society. And there's something to that. And that's why the dissemination of information, the free flow of information, no matter what it is, and freedom of speech is such an important part of not being sucked into what every other society and collection of people on the planet have been sucked into in the past: authoritarianism, oppression, this tyrannical monster that swallows everything. And all of these things, how do you get there? Is manipulation, lies, deceit. And the father of lies, the native language he speaks, Lucifer, is lies. And that's where it all goes back to, is this epic struggle of good and evil. Truly.
It's funny because when you finally have people on the right who fight back, because the right has lost nearly every culture war for 60 years. And when you finally have someone like DeSantis or Trump or Marjorie Taylor Greene, of people who are, Matt Gaetz, who are fighting back and actually putting policy. It's not just one of those where we're shaking our fists like we're Jim Jordan or you're some of these other politicians, and they don't end up doing anything. You need to be pragmatic. The problem is the left has had this head start for 100 years. So it's tough to face these foot soldiers when you're kind of changing
Yeah,
things the last couple of years. It's hard to really put. I mean, this has been a long game of. I mean, it's like in football where you decide to go with the run instead of passing down the field. It's like, look, we're going to drag this out as long as we can and have every institution that gets flooded, and we don't learn our history. I mean, what I mean, every time, every comparison to somebody is, oh, everybody's Hitler. It's like, did we not learn about Stalin in school? Did we not learn about Mao? Oh, of course we didn't. We didn't learn about the dangers of communism, that
that's right.
60 million killed, and from the Cultural Revolution, everything
Right.
with Mao and Stalin, Mussolini, everything. It's just we have
That's right.
it's and that's the control of the information. It starts, first of all, a lot of it starts at home, but a lot of it starts in the schools. And when you're not teaching proper history and you're not teaching critical thinking, you're going to have these blue-haired, nose ring,
100%.
they them pronouns in their bios that are
Right.
controlling what's going on, the flow of information.
And that's why a lot of my work, like on Radio Deadly, and in that sort of sphere of things, is the culture war. And what you're saying is 100% accurate. The destruction of the education system, or the weaponization of the education system, by eliminating things or teaching things that are in the norm, are all part and parcel to where we've gotten. But also, we've gotten here because in the early 2000s, you had people like, the three biggest donors to liberal progressive causes that affected you and I were Andy Rappaport, his wife, and George Soros. These people all got together and figured out that the Democratic Party was basically being annihilated. It was over with in the early 2000s. The conservatives, the Republican Party were beating their ass. The nationalist feeling of was really popular and taken hold, because the towers had just came down, right? 2001, September 11th, 2001. So there's this sweeping wave of enthusiasm and love for America and our country. And so these people came in and they poured hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars into the culture, and all of these other organizations popped up, like you said, for the long march. And that's when um, like Human Rights Campaign and all of these pro-abortion, anti-Christian, anti-white, all of these things started to pop up and have and really it's Antifa and the BLM mindset that has taken over, that that the revolutionary side of things. So now you have these masses of people, they just want to destroy things. They don't even know why they're destroying it, you know.
Uh,
Um, so one needs to really look at the early 2000s and do research about, like I said, Music for America, Punk Voter, MoveOn.org, and you really see the genesis of how our culture was taken over. And that's why we need to, me and you and other people that are I hate saying on this side of things, but we want to build things, and we're
it's
reaching
a
out to
side of
people
freedom.
in a
That's what it
spirit of
is.
love.
I think because when we say this side, it's not a political side. It's the side of freedom. It's like
Yeah,
I'm on the
yeah,
side that didn't want you thrown out of your job a year ago because you didn't show a
amen.
proof of a vaccine. I don't want
Right.
you thrown out of your job because you didn't wear a mask at work. I don't want you thrown out of a job because whatever your political views or anything. And that goes all across the board. I'm pro freedom. You're pro freedom. People listening to this are pro freedom. If you're somebody who were saying last year that people who are unvaccinated should be thrown out of civil society and that you shouldn't have a job and this and that, or you shouldn't have a social media account because you're spreading misinformation and disinformation. If that happens, you're not on the side of pro freedom, and therefore we are. That's when you talk about national divorce. That's all. We could do a whole other podcast about national divorce of we're not going to see eye to eye anymore. There is no common ground by some of these people. If you are not on the side of pro freedom, I, we have nothing in common there, because that should be the baseline towards everything. We can disagree on certain policies or certain social issues, whether you're pro AR-15 or anti whatever it is. We can work through that. But if you're not on the side of pro freedom, we can't have a civil conversation. Unfortunately, I'd love to, but we can't. It's amazing.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've gotten to a place where a lot of the opposition, when being opposed, instead of us just having a disagreement about form, process, whatever, our opposition, much the same as the Nazis saw the Jews and everybody else who wasn't blonde hair, blue eyed, we are deemed as morally corrupt. You know, the what did Clinton call the irredeemables, right?
Yes, the deplorables.
We can't be redeemed, right? Yeah, we have no soul. So, and because we're white, it just so happens that even if we don't think that we're being racist, we actually are being racist. And so we're morally broken. We don't have souls at all. We're undesirable. So what do you do with the undesirables? How are we going to, what are we going to do with these people who won't get they just won't get vaccinated. And now they're hurting other people. Oh my God, and they're showing up to school boards because these parents of these people are showing up to school boards, and they're hanging American flags outside, and they don't think that my child can just decide tomorrow that he's a girl when clearly he's a boy. What are we going to do? And just like the propaganda against the Jews, to where people actually believe that they were monsters and that they were, you know, they were lower than dogs. They believed that to be truth. It wasn't just, they believed that. There's a lot of people that believe that their opposition, you and I, are broken. And if they are able to,
Deprogram.
kill us online, like I was lynched online. I watched people burn their records and have a funeral for me online. If they're able to, it's like a practice area. If they're able to do that online in huge masses, I know that they could march me, you, Owen Schroyer, Alex Jones, Gavin out into the middle of the street along with Joe Biggs and everybody else, shoot us, and they won't think twice about it. Throw us in a pit.
Because they're on the good side and we're evil.
They believe
and
that they're on the good side.
It's justified. And it's the Michael Malice
Right.
quote. They want you dead, but they'll settle for your submission. I love that line.
Yeah.
I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I really appreciate, and I look at all your plugs and everything coming up. But I guess the last question I want to ask you is that it's a question that kind of rounds up this entire episode, from music to politics and social issues. Is for me, being a comedian, in today's world, it's just I don't go on stage doing politics. I'll go up there and I'll tell dick jokes and everything, and it just makes people laugh. I'm up there for a few minutes. It's not that big of a deal. But when you're in music and you're somebody who's very emotional and you put your heart into the lyrics, like when I saw you last year, I knew about your politics and everything, but you didn't get political. Have you allowed your politics, or have you found a creative way to inject? I don't want to say inject because it sounds so leftist of me to say that, but putting forth your political and social views into your music, is there a fine line between that, or how are you able to do that, or do you just avoid it altogether?
I find creative ways to add my worldview to all of my music. It's American Psycho, Famous Monsters is laden with that. Everything pretty much that I've done is laden with that. I'm just able to do it in a way that it's not just in your face. And it's not a way, I'm not going out into the world necessarily trying to convince people one way or another. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not out there evangelizing. I'm giving my opinion. I'm giving, if I'm asked. But I think at the end of the day, everything that I do comes from a place of pure humanity. I think I have maybe too much empathy and too much compassion.
Mhm.
Um, I think that the Beatles got it right. John Lennon got it right when he said that all we need is love. But in order to get there, that doesn't happen. Just the love just doesn't fall from the sky. We as humans, we have to speak to each other. We have to interact with each other. We have to be peaceful and loving with each other and listen to one another. And we have to build things. And um, the bad stuff that has come up against me, it can't touch me because my music, again, like you say, you listen to it and it's not like protest music, and it's not overtly political. It's just,
It's art, is what it is.
it really is.
Great art is
And
left up to interpretation. I said that I went to see Rage Against the Machine a couple of weeks ago, and someone said, "Why would you go see them when you know what their beliefs are and everything?" And I said, "Well, if you talk about great art, and I hear a song like Freedom, and Zach De La Rocha is yelling freedom, okay, maybe he's talking about abortion rights or whatever, but then I can interpret it a different way too. It's up to that's what great art is. It should be
I
left
love
up
that.
to interpretation instead of getting bludgeoned over the head with it."
Yeah, I love that. I love that you just said that, and I'm able to experience music and art in that way too. Yeah. So I mean, it really comes down to um nothing that has been said about me or any of the detractors, the negative stuff, will ever really hold up against my life and my legacy, because anyone who's willing to just take the time to say, all right, let me just look into this guy a little bit. You spend 15, 20 minutes looking into me. You it's easy to see that I've really devoted myself, and I devote myself to a higher cause, and I'm really trying to build people up, and um, like the kids say, be kind. I'm a because things really are so bad, and I hate, because I'm always the positive guy, but things in the world, like our world, truly is a disaster. It's a friggin' mess. And I have young kids. I have a 13-year-old, I have a 10-year-old, I have a 5-year-old. And I'm uh yeah, so
Scary times,
scary time.
but there's people, at least nowadays, we have our some outlets before they get banned, like this podcast, or like being on censored.tv, Radio Deadly, that's yours. And then are you going out on tour again pretty soon?
Yeah, I'm going back out on the road end of September. Again, a lot of the private shows. I'll be out in Los Angeles at the Whiskey. I'll be at the Hard Rock Cafe in Pittsburgh, a Brass Mug down in Tampa, Florida. But most of them are private shows.
Yeah, well, one of these times I'll have to bring you over back to Ohio and have a nice private show here, or a public show. I could get you guys in some way. We could probably talk off the air, but and get some of those folks with the Gravediggers Union, because I'm a part of it. Actually, I have the shirt. I don't know why I didn't pull it out, but I have one of your shirts there on the website. But Michael,
Awesome.
this has been fantastic. I've really appreciated talking to you and getting a chance to talk to you a little longer, because there was like a long line of people, and I got a quick picture with you and just I said hi and great show and everything. And I'm like, I'd love to talk to him, but there's like 80 people who are also standing in line that wanted to talk, and I didn't want to be that guy that holds up the line. So it's great to have this hour plus to talk to you, and I can't wait to post this and let and just get the word out and just spread the love that you are putting forth in your art, and that's what it goes in. We're a lot of this is not out of anger that we're talking. It's a lot of frustration, but luckily that there are people out there like yourself that is putting out good art, and also doing so for people who really need it, especially the Joe Biggs and Ethan Nordine and others that are really suffering. And that's why you really went to January. You were out there in January 5th and 6th to kind of bring some joy to some people who've been so pent up with frustration.
Yeah, man, for sure. I appreciate the time. Anytime, you want to do this again, you just let me know. There's we could pick several topics
Oh,
that
yeah.
we hit tonight and probably talk for hours about it. Um, yeah, yeah. I
Excellent.
encourage everybody to stay positive. I have to encourage myself to stay positive
Yeah,
all day
absolutely.
long.
Yeah, I know. I trust me. That gets frustrating, but yeah, no. But hey, having a good conversation like this is, I think, what is much needed here in our
Yeah,
society instead of echo chamber. It's nice to be in an echo chamber for a little bit, but it's also nice to kind of just talk about things and put them out in the open. And of course, until we get banned on social media and whenever that happens too.
unbelievable,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, hey, I again, I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Michael.
Yeah, man. Anytime. I'll talk to you soon.